Well, I'm going to start us off. I just want to thank everybody, all of our attendees, to this, our first ever Slow Living Summit virtual conference. This was not how we intended things to be this year, but this is where we're at. And I'm so grateful to all of our speakers and to our staff and all of you, our attendees, who have really been with us this whole journey. I'm going to pass it over to Jen Brandt. She is our Slow Living Summit coordinator and one of my favorite people on earth. Sorry, Jen. She is going to let you know what you have in store today.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the participant count here, and it just keeps going up, so that's very exciting. I do want to give a shout out to Peter as well, our silent partner. He doesn't have to talk if he doesn't want to. He is the Wyndham Grows coordinator extraordinaire. He jumped into this right before, you know, everything happened with the world changing with COVID, and he has done a wonderful job as well. He is our tech guru and just sort of our all-around moral support. So very happy to have him on board as well. Yeah, this is new to all of us as well. We've been doing as many Zoom calls as I think many of you have. So we have really gotten us up to date as we think possible. So excuse any glitches, we're doing the best we can and just very excited to have you all and part of this journey as well. Today we're gonna start off with Frankie. This is our first one. So we're very excited to have her take it away. And yeah, hopefully you'll really enjoy it. And we will have her speak for about an hour. And then we will do half an hour of Q&A right after this. So very excited. I'll have Frankie take it away.
I began with this slide that my daughter took this photograph 20 years ago as we were traveling in India, pushing the edge of hope. We went around the world to find people who we felt were pushing the edge of hope for the rest of us. And from that trip, we came up with this, oh, wait a minute. These people are faced with such huge obstacles, but they are the most engaged and hopeful people we've ever met. And so we came to this conclusion that hope is not what we find in evidence, it's what we become in action together. And that's then been the motto of our lives. And so I am really, my Twitter handle, by the way, is Hope Monger, which is quite a job description for myself. And I've been struggling all my life to ask, you know, what is honest hope? What is not dreamy-eyed hope? And so I've had to come to the understanding that you can't really be hopeful that you're making a difference if you don't have a theory of how we got here. So I'm going to take you through how my life path brought me to the understanding of what I think is the root of our crisis and how we can all participate in addressing it. So the next slide is back in 1968, I was living in the world in which scarcity scare was everywhere. Paul Ehrlich's bomb had just exploded, telling us that population is going to mean mass starvation on a dying planet. And I was a young woman really eager to find my path. And I said, is that right? Gosh, food, I can start with food. Are we really running out? Is that our problem? So I went to the library and I put 2 and 2 together and realized, wait a minute, no. Actually, there's more than enough for all of us. And so I began to see then that we are actually creating the scarcity that we say we fear. And so I wrote, the next slide, this little book. Well, there I was sitting on the log trying to figure it out. And then the next slide was what came out of all that pondering is that I realized that we humans were actually creating the experience of scarcity, no matter how much was grown, because there was plenty then as there is now. So, but the scarcity scare continued. And I've been pushing back just to give you some numbers, next slide, some numbers to make my case that even though today you will hear people still saying, no, we're running out of food, actually, for every person, every day, there's 2,900 calories for each of us, as I say, and that's about 20% more than when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet. So it's continued to grow. Our food supply comes to about 3 to 4 pounds per person. And next slide. I love to say that that's just on the leftovers. That's just on, we feed about half of all grain to livestock, and it goes into fuel and that sort of thing as well. And listen to this. This is after we use about 3/4 or more of our agricultural land to produce livestock, who return to us only 17% of our calories. A tremendous shrinking goes on. And that's also not counting that we waste 1/3 of our food. So I began to see, of course, that scarcity is not the cause of hunger. And so, next slide. Nonetheless, today, I really choke up to tell you this, that actually hunger started increasing again. Now we have a number, 821 million officially calorie deficient, which is pretty much where we were 20 years ago. And that this middle piece of my slide here, 1 in 5 children stunted by malnutrition, please know that is lifelong harm. That's just not being shorter than average. And now it's estimated that 2 billion of us are suffering from extreme to moderate food insecurity. So I'm suggesting then that this amidst plenty, we've reduced people's reality to the experience of scarcity, horrendous scarcity, and particularly hurting young children. And another thing that is so evident in the last few decades is that calories, which is what the UN uses to measure hunger, calories have been separating from nutrition as more and more calories have less and less nutrition. So for example, I talked to a doctor in rural India who told me that 20 or so years ago, his patients came to him, several thousand a month. So many poor people needed his help, and they didn't have sufficient calories. But today he says that they come to him, they have enough calories, but 60% are suffering from heart disease or diabetes. So the world has changed, so there are plenty of calories, and yet they're more and more degraded. And so in addition to that, then, next slide, we've turned our food system into a major habitat and earth life threat because of its contribution to climate change. There is now a new report suggesting that 29% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. And so all of these crises are compounding the hunger crisis, the degradation of soil, and the loss of species. Next slide. So this climate impact is very heavily influenced by, this climate impact is very heavily influenced then by our food choices, as we see in this slide here that compares how much greenhouse gases we're putting out for every unit of food that we put into our mouths. And you can see the huge difference between the top vegetable protein food and the bottom beef in terms of the amount of greenhouse gases per unit of food that we eat. So this has been a huge part of the problem. And so what I've continued to ask myself is then, why are we, next slide. I want to give a shout out to my daughter first, yes. Sorry, Anna, I almost forgot. I wanted to honor you here because in 2011, Anna Lappé released this work, Diet for a Hot Planet, and she lays out everything that in very engaging detail that I've tried to capture in a few minutes here. And so I highly recommend Diet for a Hot Planet, tying together the climate crisis and our food and nutrition crisis. And so you can see how I've tried to go deeper and understand that it's not a lack of food. What is it then? And so my questions kept growing until sometime maybe in the late 90s, I came to, next slide, I came to ask this question, which is the biggest one that I could think of. Next slide.
I'm sorry, Francis, we seem to be frozen on a slide.
Okay, well, I'll just jump right to what it says, because it says, wait a minute, the biggest question I could ever come to is not why hunger, but why are we together? We humans, we're so smart, right? We're the smartest species. Why are we creating together a world that none of us as individuals would ever choose, right? Because nobody gets up in the morning and says, yes, 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 I want to heat the planet and undermine our food supply and everything else. Or nobody gets up and says, yes, I want another child to be stunted by malnutrition. So why are we together creating a world that as individuals we would never choose? And over time, I began to see, okay, what's different about our species? What's special about our species? And I came to see that what is unique about us is that we are creatures of the mind. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. And we see through culturally formed filters and literally cannot see what doesn't fit within that frame, what we expect to see. Albert Einstein said it is theory which decides what we can observe. And so I want to tell you a very homey story. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So, I have this very homey story to explain this idea. And that is that one Thanksgiving morning I woke up and we have 35 people coming for Thanksgiving dinner in the afternoon. And I want to start chopping my vegetables and getting them into this big pot that I cook this great root vegetable dish for Thanksgiving. And I can't find this pot. And I get so frustrated and I look everywhere and I can't find it. I can't find it. And then I said, okay, I'm just going to start chopping vegetables. And about 15 minutes later, I turn around and there is my pot, except that it had a plant in it. And so I have this slide, if you can see it, of my planter. I turned the pot, this red pot, very bright red, it put a plant in it. And so what I was looking for was not a planter. I was looking for something to put in the oven. And since I don't put plants in the oven, literally, I couldn't see it. And I started laughing at myself and I said, there you go. Believing is seeing. And so I started turning around this seeing is believing into this framing that is our downfall, that we see the world through filters. And so that's my very homey story, but it's very, it can be deadly when we see what we expect to see. And so my thesis with you today is that we see the world through a frame of scarcity still, and it is scarcity of goods and goodness in part. But I think of it as scarcity mind that has 3 S's to it. If you can see the slide number 14. The 3 S's are, we see that we're all separate from one another in the earth, and that things are static. That is, the second S is stasis. And the third is scarcity itself, but not just of things like food. It's also a scarcity of goodness is in this worldview that we've absorbed. I've heard the line that those who tell the story rule the world, attributed to, I believe, Plato and the Hopi Indian, and it makes perfect sense to me. And the story that we've swallowed is one of scarcity of both goods, of things we need, and goodness in us. And so that begins then what I call the spiral of powerlessness, which is the next slide. And that spiral of powerless, I call it a spiral because it's reinforcing itself. And it starts with the assumption that, that human beings, we just really, we just don't have it. We don't have the capacities. We are so selfish, materialistic, and competitive that we can never really come together in common problem solving. That's one piece of the scarcity. And that common problem solving for me, is democracy itself. And so we fall for this idea really pushed on us since the 1980s, that there is some automatic law of the marketplace that will solve the whole problem of distribution for us, because the better, the more determined and productive they will win out in this. Well, it's not any kind of market that we go for, though. It is one type of market. It is market driven by a single rule of highest return to existing wealth. So wealth accrues to wealth, accrues to wealth, until we live in a world then in which, the next slide.
Frankie, just to let you know, we did lose the slides, but you are compelling. Please keep going.
Okay, so I'll try to, I like to use my hands to make you see things anyway. So I was about to show, okay, 20, get ready, because it's really hard to get your head around. 26 people controlling as much wealth as half the world's population. 26 people. And so we on this spiral of powerlessness, where we start out with this dim view of ourselves, we turn over our fate to a peculiar notion of the market. It ends up then in such concentration of wealth that what happens is that wealth then infuses and distorts and corrupts our political system. And I just want to point out, for example, in the world of food, that agribusiness spends more on lobbying than the defense industry. And that overall, there are about almost 24 lobbyists typically in Washington for every person that you and I send there to represent us that we voted for in Congress. So we end up then with this spiral, okay, dim view of ourselves, concentrated power, that power corrupts our political system. And then guess what? We start distrusting our government, of course. And we end up electing a Donald Trump because we're so disgusted and distrusting. And then what happens? The more we distrust ourselves, the more we don't believe in democracy, the more money can take over. And so we end up with what I call privately held government. And so that really is the huge, huge part of the crisis. And concentrated political power, just to give you a few ideas for how that works in the food system, is that concentrated power, in just a few decades we've seen, many of you who are part of the food and agriculture world, you know that several decades ago we had many family and smaller competitive seed companies, dozens of them. This was decades ago. And today, as this power concentrates in fewer and fewer hands, we have three companies that control half of the global proprietary seed market. And so, for example, GMO corn has now cornered 93% of the US market. And of course, as soon as that happened, the prices of seeds began to go up. And so what I'm saying then is that we end up then with this concentrated power that is creating the very conditions that we know bring out the very worst in us. And so this is where I am in this spiral. By concentrating money power, we concentrate political power, and we know that that is the number one condition that brings out the worst in human beings. But we also create two other conditions that bring out the worst in us, and that is secrecy, as we saw with Wall Street when they were, just creating these back in this 2007 and before the crash. They were creating these very risky derivatives, but selling them as legitimate investments because things were secretive. And their slogan was IBG, YBG, I'll be gone, you'll be gone. So secrecy is a second condition that is created out of this mindset. And the third we see intensely today is the tendency to blame the other. If we're locked in fear of scarcity and the culture is concentrating wealth, then we're diverted from identifying this concentrated wealth as a problem, and we're made to blame each other, which is what we see big time today. And so that then is really a big part of why I see we're in the deep, deep trouble that we are in. And there's another piece of this in terms of our humanity that explains it for me, is that concentrated power, secrecy, and blaming also they keep humanity from experiencing our deep needs beyond the physical. And that is our need for a sense of agency, that is power, our sense of meaning and purpose in our lives, and our connection with one another. And we need those to thrive, we humans. And so that then is, for me, the trap. When I said that we need a causal theory, well, I've shared with you mine, and I would love you to give me feedback and push back and deepen my thinking. But that is something of the spiral causation that has gotten us into this misery, both devastation of the environment, such incredible poverty and hunger in our own country and the world. And so we really, I want to say the best news in terms of science today for me is that they've discovered that what they call neoplasticity, it's my favorite word, neoplasticity. That means that our brains can make new connections. As we have new ideas, we can see the world in new ways. And so I'm suggesting that we need to move from the 3 S's of the scarcity mind to the 3 C's of what I call the eco mind. And so what I want to begin my journey to then the eco mind as this. So separation, the S, is replaced with connection. That's the first C of the eco mind. The stasis is the static quality is replaced with change and continuous change. And therefore, the third C is we're all co-creating moment to moment our lives, our future, our earth. And so I love to say the only choice we don't have is whether to change the world. If we're all connected in continuous change, then every choice we make is sending ripples throughout our world. And so that really is the beginning of the solution. And I want to start sharing with you the stories that keep me so very excited today. I love also, I just saw the note to myself to mention Hans Peter Durer. He's now deceased, but he is such a hero to me, a German physicist. And he told me once, Frankie, you know, in biological systems, in ecological systems, there are no parts, there are only participants. And that sort of sums up the ecological worldview. We are all participants and our actions then matter. And so what we then see then is that as we move from scarcity mind to eco mind, that our political system is perversely aligned, our economic system is perversely aligned with our needs, and we can then really start creating the conditions that bring out the very best in us, and we can create a spiral instead of disempowerment, a spiral of empowerment. And so that spiral, it starts with the assumption that, of course, human beings, yes, we have a downside. We can be incredibly brutal to one another, but we also have capacity for cooperation, deep, deep sensitivity to fairness, for example, and very strongly empathetic. Even babies are shown to cry at the sound of other babies crying. So we have a lot to work with if we create the rules that bring out the best in us, our need for our connection, power, and meaning. And as we create those rules, then we can create a spiral of empowerment that removes the power of private wealth from our democracy. And I'll return to that at the end of my talk. And that then creates that we are able to create the conditions of transparency, of dispersion of power, and mutual accountability instead of blaming, that bring out the very best in us. And that makes it possible to then begin to imagine and to live what I call living democracy. My organization in Brattleboro during the 1990s, Brattleboro, Vermont, was called the Center for Living Democracy. And what it was about was really shifting, again, the mental map about democracy itself. It isn't the thing, the dull, whatever, we have to swallow to get our juicy dessert of personal freedom. No, democracy is who we are. We are creatures who need connection, need to feel our lives count, need to feel we have a voice and a sense of purpose. So democracy is not some add-on or some structure that we inherited. It is who we are. It is a life, a culture. And So when we used to do the 4th of July marches through Brattleboro, our banner for the Center for Living Democracy was democracy. It's not what we do, excuse me, it's not what we have, it's what we do. Democracy, not what we have, what we do. And so I just want to then go a little bit more about what that really means. And to suggest the power of the food movement in the birth of a truly living democracy. Because I think that food, and I get kind of teary as I say this, that my hunch as a 26-year-old was really good when I thought, oh, food. Everybody likes to eat. Everybody comes together around food. And therefore, what power that has. And so I want to share with you that I just learned recently that the root meaning of the word companion is with bread. In other words, our companions are those with whom we share bread and eat together, rather. So I just want to mention the stories of living democracy as it relates to food that most inspire me right now. I had the incredible privilege several years ago to visit India, a place that was once called the pesticide capital of the world. And I just want to double check. Can you still hear me?
We can, and you look fantastic, by the way. You're just so compelling.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm loving doing this. I didn't think I could do it, but it's okay.
You're doing a great job. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for staying with me, everybody who's here. So I want to tell you this amazing experience. I tear up because I went to India and met with people who I'd read about, but it was almost beyond belief what they'd achieved. These were people, women in very oppressed people, Dalit women, the lowest caste women in India, who had 20 years prior to my visit, they said that they were hungry every day. They were beaten by their partners. They were humiliated by landlords. They were hungry every day. They were so poor, they could only afford one sari, that they had to sort of wash a piece of it at a time as they moved it around their body because they couldn't change clothes. They were that poor. And when I met them, they took me out into their fields with 20 crops over just a few acres, and they with all the nutrition that you would ever want, you know, the legumes and the greens and the grains and the root crops, all there and thriving. And they'd even, after 7 years of lobbying, gotten a radio station of their own to tell others what they're doing. And every year they do a tour, go village to village to share seeds and to share their story of arising from absolute devastation and poverty. And in the slide that you can't see, but I love this, if you can imagine, I have a slide of these women in their beautiful saris, and their hands are all outstretched toward one another in a circle. And they're all pledging with one another, not to use GMOs, not to use pesticides. And the third pledge is to share everything they learn. And so these were an example, and now it's in dozens and dozens and dozens of other villages. They've helped to inspire a statewide movement that has reduced pesticide use by half over just well less than, I think it was a 6-year period, and they're going for a complete elimination of pesticides by 2027. And so these are among my hero of all heroes, the Deccan Development Society women. And I so enjoy sharing their triumph. But I also want to take you to another part of the world where I want to take you to another part of the world because I was so disturbed, as I'm sure many of you who look at the global picture, that sub-Saharan Africa is where people are suffering the most from lack of food. And that the poorest country in the world is Niger, just under the Sahara Desert, very dry country. And I want to just tell you this astonishing thing that has occurred there. That they discovered that tree planting did not work. But almost by accident, they began to discover that allowing the regrowth of trees that had been cut in part during the colonial era, they enabled them over about 2 decades to regrow 200 million trees and create an agroforestry, farming with trees. And that's turned out to be one of the most productive farming systems, the integration of trees and farming. And the trees that they chose have rich nitrogen fertilizer, in their leaves that drop, and it transformed their lives, transformed the gender relationships. It was each one teach one in a way, so farmers spread this word. And so over now 17 million acres in this poor country, they were able to grow up to 60 trees in an acre, and from 20 to 60, and end hunger for 2.5 million people. And now this approach is spreading throughout that very poor area in Africa. And so that's one story that just absolutely moves my heart. And in the United States, there are many people who are taking that lesson to heart. I particularly encourage you to go to the Savannah Institute website if you're interested in learning about agroforestry, US style. It's a wonderful organization. And the other piece I wanted to bring up is just about my daughter's work in terms of bringing these insights into the United States. She's working on many fronts, but one of them is called the Good Food Purchasing Program. And this is working with school districts across the country. And now 15 cities are actively engaged with this Good Food Purchasing Program. And the benefit has already gone to 2.5 million students who are getting healthier food because their school districts are seeking to find food that they can access locally near them, that is healthy and whole and much more nutritious, and that is also fair food, where they have a criteria, of course, about how the farm workers are treated and the farmers are thriving. So that is something I'm extremely proud of my daughter for so many things, but Good Food Purchasing Program. Her website is Real Food Media, and you can read about all of this. And so what I'm now coming toward the end of my talk, that I want to describe to you that we must dig deep into the roots of our crises. And if you peel away the layer after layer after layer, fundamentally, the question is who decides? Who is making the choices? And so I made a very important vow to myself in 2015 that I would really devote a good part of my energy to birthing real democracy in America, whatever that could turn out to mean. And I ended up marching from Philadelphia to Washington as part of Democracy Spring in 2016. And it was life-changing, life-changing. For one, somebody said to me, Frankie, you can love 2 children at once. And since I have 2 kids, I love them both. I got it. And I can love my food movement and I can love the democracy movement, and they're inseparable. And so what I have done now, my latest book was called Daring Democracy. I wrote with millennial Adam Eichen, and who I got to know on this march. And so what I wanted to share with you today is that there is a citizen-powered movement for democracy that is touching all across the country, and that in the 2018 election, the 2018 midterms made huge advances that were really undersung, from Seattle that had democracy vouchers that voters could get to donate to their preferred candidates in the city council race, and that was a real innovation, to ranked choice voting, it was used for the first time. In Maine, they fought for that. And there are also such powerful, powerful stories in the democracy movement. I highly recommend a new film to you. now that we have a little time to watch more film maybe, but it is called Slay the Dragon, Slay the Dragon. And it is so beautifully done. It's so cinematic. And the star of it is my hero, Katie Fahey, a 20-something gal who created a movement for ending gerrymandering in Michigan, and they won. And it's just a moving story. So you can hear about, learn about Katie Fahey in that movie, Slay the Dragon. So I want to now wrap up with just a few words about what it takes, what is called for in this time of enormous disruption that could, from the pandemic, certainly, and the economic crisis and climate crisis, and the awareness now even more than ever of how our policing has become so militarized and inhuman that can actually commit murder on, as we've seen. So all of this crisis, what is required of us? It's being willing to do what we thought we could not do. And that is what I think a lot about, because one of the themes of this talk in my life is that we live in this world of continuous change where everything is connected. And so in such a world, if you think about it, it is not possible to know what's possible. If it's not possible to know what's possible, then maybe this moment, this extraordinary moment of pain and just grief and horror at the losses could be a moment in which new possibilities would arise if we have the courage to step out and try the new. And so what I began to say then is that what is required is bold humility. And the boldness I think of as just that, of doing what we thought we could not do. And that means rethinking fear itself, because I went through a period of intense fear about 20 years ago. And I wrote a little book about fear with a millennial as well, Jeff Perkins. And it was about fear as pure energy, fear as pure energy that we can use as we choose. And so rather than being a stop sign, the fear that we're experiencing now could be, oh, that means go. Let us go together and do what we have not done before. And so that's the humility part in bold humility, is to really recognize that it's not possible to know what's possible. And that's very humbling. But on the other hand, that notion of fear is a pure energy. I will share with you a very cheesy, but I think it works for me anyway, reframe. And that is that there was this moment where I was with my friends and I started to realize I had to do something that my friends would not particularly like, but to be true to myself, I had to do it. And my heart started going wild and pounding and pounding. And I said, oh, Frankie, you're the reframer. Why don't you reframe that as inner applause, telling you to go for it? And I got my hand up and I proceeded. So that is something of the spirit of which I would really encourage us to be filled with that spirit of it's not possible to know what's possible. And I just want to take you back to those women in India that I introduced you to, the Deccan Development Society. Well, I was leaving the village after we had this amazing conversation, and they ran after me and they said, oh, we forgot to tell you the most important thing. This was all being translated, of course, but we forgot to tell you the most important thing is courage. And they said, it is with our women's group that we have courage. And so that is really what I lead us to in the end here of my talk, is that we find courage together. Where is our courage? It is not to deny our fear, but to learn to walk with our fear in that pounding heart energy. And your purpose, you would not be on this event if you did not have a desire for more purpose and sense of impact in your life. And so have to surround ourselves. If you're not with a buddy now, or no, but make sure that you have people around you who are encouraging you to take those risks, because we need that. We need that. We are social, and we can use that power of our connection with others. So I say that this is your power. It is your sense of purpose. It is the buddies that you surround you with, and it is your courage to do what you thought you could not do. And so I honor you for being in this time, and I'm so glad that you asked me to speak. Thank you.
Frankie, thank you so much. That was amazing and wonderful, and just incredible. I'm feeling it. I'm really feeling it, what you just said. So inspiring. We do have an opportunity for folks to ask some questions. So we can jump right into that if you're okay, if you're game.
Yep, I am.
All right. So we have a question from Lori. Lori is asking, why are you not talking more about the merits of a vegetarian diet?
Well, I guess I'm trying to, I don't know, it's a good question. I did talk about, I guess you didn't see the slide, yeah. But, you know, in terms of climate change, that obviously that a vegetarian diet is vastly less impactful in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, I'm writing a new book about climate change, and the estimates are all over the map, but they range from, you know, like a few dozen times more greenhouse gases per unit of food if you're eating beef, certainly, to, you know, more than 100 you know, times more eating beef. So I'm sorry, I got carried away with all the other messages, and I guess maybe I assume that people know me with Diet for a Small Planet. But the other thing I had planned to do in my talk that I forgot to say is that, I don't know if you have read, you're aware of the Eat Lancet report that came out in 2019. It was the Lancet Journal, all focused on the sustainability issues and climate change questions. And clearly they made a very, very strong statement that I had written out here, that food is the single most powerful lever for addressing, you know, both human health and planetary health. So I strongly, the theme of the power of the food movement and how I love two children at once, in the sense that food and democracy have to come together, but you can't get there, whether it's the health benefits of a plant-centered diet, whether it's the land, you know, the biodiversity that's enhanced with it, whether it's the workers in the meat packing plants. I mean, there's so many levels in which a plant-centered diet is so many advantages. So I highly recommend, again, my daughter's book, Diet for a Hot Planet, Diet for a Small Planet. I'll be working on the 50th anniversary edition chapter. It'll come out next year. So that is, I didn't know if I'd be here for the 50th anniversary, but here I am. So all of that is very real for me. I guess I don't know why I didn't say more, because it's clearly at the center of my life right now, especially with the climate piece of it. So thank you for asking that key question.
Thank you, Frankie. Next question is, given what you've said about living democracy and participation and redistribution of wealth and power, what do you see as the role of cooperatives and credit unions in our economy and with the empowerment of people in their communities?
Oh, I love that question too. I wrote a piece, what did I call it? Anyway, if anybody wanted to email me, you could just go info@smallplanet.org, and I could send you this blog. But I'm a huge co-op fan, and I really point out both how many cooperatives are stepping up in terms of renewable energy production as well as food production. And so I think that that is a key part of the democratization of our economy, is the cooperative movement. And I'd love to share with you this blog I wrote not too long ago that has links to some really key, exciting things. But I am, and I think that if we work together to create more of a political democracy that would enhance the capacity of the cooperative movement, make it easier for the cooperative movement to succeed and to be known, and to get away from simply the privately held corporation as the model. And I just don't think Americans appreciate the incredible contribution of, I was just at a co-op hardware store yesterday, but how important that movement is. And once I saw this figure that more people are members of co-ops in the world than own shares in publicly traded companies, that it's much more real a movement than most Americans are able to see now. And we've got to get that word out. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Frankie. I think Peter has been putting some of the resources you mentioned in the chat, but I think we could probably compile some and send to the attendees after, if you're game for doing that.
Sure, okay. Absolutely. I'd love to do that. And, our Small Planet Institute website has, it has all our books and blogs about these kinds of questions. So yes, please.
Great. Okay, on to the next question. This is from Alex. Can we use the COVID-19 pandemic as a lever or motivation to bring about some of the big changes that are needed? How do we do that?
Well, I think this is the election year of my lifetime. And so we're starting something called youdecide.org. We did it in 2004, but I think it's more important than ever. We, meaning Small Planet. This is going to be a website that anybody can go to that could help us reach independence with a message that is balanced and fair and not propagandistic at all. Because I do think that the answer to using this moment for positive instead of othering is by having a voice that is more able to listen to citizens than our current administration. So I can't talk about using this moment, this terribly frightening moment, for the positive without mentioning that that seeing our work to reach independents who aren't locked into so much into the administration's casting, that I mentioned this is a website that people can download these balanced flyers we create and then distribute them to maybe relatives or friends who've gotten caught up in this negative mindset of the current administration. So that's one answer. I mean, more directly speaking, I think just to remind people that that this pandemic shows us how intensely connected we are to one another and responsible to one another's health, and that our medical system, because it is privately controlled for profit, it was so unprepared. In the beginning, I looked at how many beds the US had per capita compared to the rest of the world, industrial countries, and we ranked 31st in terms of beds available in the beginning of this pandemic, just to show you how unprepared we were when we think of ourselves as the leading whatever. So I think that really using this moment to show how we need a public option. We need a medical system that's not driven by the profit motive. I have a friend who's going to be producing a blog showing that in the last few months, that 2 people in top of the private insurance companies have each collected something like $25 million during the pandemic. So I can get that blog too, if anybody wants to follow up on that. But it's just horrifying, a privately held healthcare system profiting on our misery. So I think that can also be a lesson that motivates people to really support a publicly sponsored healthcare system. So I hope that's an answer. It's such a big question, and I'm struggling with it myself very much. But I think connecting the dots, you know, that democracy is not just a distant structure. It's really the choices that we make daily, and we are so far behind so much of the rest of the world in the degree of our inequality and the measurement of our democracy. We're down. We rank about 56th in the world in terms of electoral integrity. So we have a lot of work to do to be able to take advantage of this moment.
Thanks, Frankie. Next question.
Big questions, hard questions.
Yeah, and there's more to come. Just wait, this next question is great. From Bonnie, asks, how does the cooperative business model fit into your vision for creating resilient communities and a world that we would choose? Well, to me, cooperative is democracy in its economic form. So it is central. It is central. And I was raving about the numbers of people who are member of cooperatives more than most Americans appreciate. And yet I also know that in terms of worker cooperatives, it's very slim. And so to me, the ultimate of my vision of a democratic economy is with flourishing of cooperatives, and that we have many publicly owned utilities, say, especially in the rural area. We have, and that too can be very democratic. But I really think that just to begin to get that message out, again, I totally think that the cooperative embodies, I talked about transparency, I talked about the three conditions of that define democracy are the dispersion of power, transparency, and mutual accountability instead of blaming. And that is what, to me, a cooperative is about. And each of us can, to the extent that we can support cooperatives. Unfortunately, my favorite one in the Cambridge area isn't there now. But that just to underscore that the cooperative movement, what it's always stood for, and its very structure is that carries those three conditions of democracy and that bring out the very best in us. And so I just couldn't say enough positive about the cooperative movement, as it offers hope for this stage beyond what I call brutal capitalism, because this is such a brutal form. This just do whatever it is that brings the highest return to people already at the top. That's what. Do you know that the richest 1% since 1970, the richest 1% have their income has risen 100 times faster than the bottom 50%. I think I have that right. You should fact check me on that, but it's just incredible. So this is not even the form of capitalism that I grew up with. This is a brutal form. And we got to be better at explaining that there are other models, there are other ways to have a market. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, if you challenge the market, then you want everything run by the state. And people who are in the cooperative movement know that's not true. And we've got to explain that we can have a market that is fair, and that the rules are set so that we prevent monopoly, and that it is this one rule economy, one rule market, highest return to existing wealth that creates monopoly. And monopoly is the death knell of the market. So we can position ourselves as being pro-market, fair market, participatory, where we all have a voice. And if I can just say one more word on that, I had this glorious moment in the 1980s of debating Milton Friedman. Can you believe it? And so because I read his book in college about, freedom of choice. And so I said, Dr. Friedman, we only have choice to the degree that we can participate in the market, and therefore the wider distribution of purchasing power, the more freedom we have, the more the market works. And he didn't say much. But that's how I see it.
Let me unmute myself. Looks like I'm going to assume, because both Peter and Lissa are in the same place, that they lost their Wi-Fi right now. So I'll take over the questions right now.
Thank you.
Bonnie Hudspeth had a similar question to one before, but I'll just touch on it real quick so we can get her name in here. How does the cooperative business model fit into your vision for creating resilient communities and a world that we would choose?
Well, that's what I was trying to get at. To me, in the last thing I said, that what is a cooperative? I mean, that's just a word for most people, but it really embodies, as I said, these three conditions that bring out the best enough. The dispersion of power. It's not just concentrated in one shareholder or a bunch of billionaires. So it's dispersion of power, and things are transparent, as they are not in our current form of capitalism. And it's based on this idea of mutual accountability instead of just blaming or manipulating, the consumer. So it is the very embodiment, if you will. The structure of a co-op is the embodiment of this notion of living democracy in the economic piece of it. And there are other ways. I mean, it's not the only one. I mean, I think a public utility, for example, if it has an elected commission that really runs it and is accountable and everything is transparent, because there are renewable energy commissions, utilities that are public and could be very democratic. Mm-hmm. Could be, if we step up and make sure that they're not doing deals behind closed doors. As I have a new book that will be out in a PDF form. If anybody would like to read it, I'm going to put it out this summer. Because of the lockdown, I'm not going to publish it. I'm going to put it out for review, and the review is with you, any reader. So if you would like to get a copy, it's called It's Not Too Late. It's Not Too Late. People say, Frankie, you got to finish it before it is too late. I hope I can do that. So it's not too late. The subtitle is Crisis, Opportunity, and the Power of Hope. And sometime, hopefully before July 1st, if you just want to email info@smallplanet.org, we could send you that PDF and you could give us comments. And I try to really paint exactly, go in much more depth on the climate questions, but also on the democracy piece of it at the end of the book.
That's awesome. I love that. I love hearing that there's just, new material that can always be written and researched and doing the hard work out here. So we have one from Emma. She says, hi, Francis, I love you. I'm thinking a lot about your personality at this moment. And we'd love to hear about where your work emerges in with respect to food insecurity and racial disparity, particularly in America.
Well, food insecurity is obviously a crisis of extreme inequality. Duh, it's, and this increasing othering of poor people as blamed, and then it becomes very racialized in our racist world, racist America, and too much of the world. And so I think the more that we can get our language out of the language of poor people as, I don't know how, as the burden, or we should solve their problem, but rather the opening of fair opportunity and absolute, the tremendous abundance of food in the society is just breathtaking. And getting out of the scarcity frame so that quality food can be available to all of us. I mean, we throw out so much. I just signed up with something, a purveyor who brings food that would have been thrown out, sort of ugly food. Suppose I just got to tell you this one anecdote about it. That one of the things I got was just giant, really an onion that big, and I figured that it didn't look like a regular onion because it wasn't a regular onion sign. I'm just pointing this out to show the incredible waste built into our food system of things that wouldn't have been even brought to market. So the more that, back to food security, the more that we can just underscore that it's not a problem of, well, if they eat, I don't eat, but it's how do we take advantage of the incredible abundance and make sure, I'm sure this audience has heard the term food desert, and the making available in inner cities and poor areas the abundance of healthy food. And that's where food cooperatives and organic farmers who tend to be people with a great conscience about how their food is being used. And I really feel like the food security question is just all about addressing the extreme inequality and everything about, the basics such as our minimum wage. If our minimum wage had kept up with inflation, I'm sure you've heard these numbers, that it would be well over $20. And that we just have not stood up for fairness in terms of wages, and stood up against monopoly power, and those and gone with and stood with unions. That Food and Commercial Workers Union my son-in-law works for, it's just a powerful force. And so all these ways that people could have jobs that actually bring them enough to feed their families, and then at the same time making sure that food waste is reduced so that this wonderful food becomes available. So there's not one answer, but certainly who we vote for in November, and getting back to a framing, not of blaming poor people for their poverty, but recognizing that we have a system that creates poverty out of plenty, and that we don't have to do that. And there have been times, I'd love to just paint this picture of that just because a lot of people don't appreciate it, I just want to go on for just a minute, that my children were born in the early 70s. I was born in 1944. My children were born in the early 70s. And if just imagine the slide I have, because it's so dramatic. So my generation, that all income brackets doubled their real family income from the 40s to the 70s. It just was amazing. And guess who gained the most? It was the poorest people who gained the most. And then my children born in the 70s, it just completely reverses, and all the money that, the income gains of households all goes to the very, very top. And the poor gain the least by far, and the richest gain the most by far. So I just want your generation, younger generation here on this call, to just really let that sink in, that even in America, with all of our dysfunctionality, that there have been periods where we have made great progress, and now people are denigrating that and say, oh, we had a war on poverty and poverty won. In fact, I was part of the war on poverty, and we cut the poverty rate by 42% in about a decade. So I just want to encourage us that with the right public policies, we can do a great deal to reduce hunger and to end hunger. And all these different dimensions about fair wages, about supporting unions and co-ops, and local farms that can offer their food in a way that it doesn't get wasted. All of that is part of the solution. And Anna's real food purchasing program, so that institutions like schools are buying healthy food for kids who will really benefit, especially if their families are poor.
I want to be a little cognizant of time, so I want to skip ahead to two really quick things, and then we can go back to some of these other questions. It says we have Dita Varletta saying decide.org isn't coming up in a web search. Is that perhaps?
Oh, it's youdecide.org, and I'm not, youdecide.org. I'm not sure what's there right now, but it will be up very, very soon. And I just can't tell you how exciting it is to have something that you can show your relative who voted for Trump or whatever, and it's all just balanced by issue. And my favorite story from 2004 is that a tattoo artist would put these flyers in front of his clients while he was tattooing them. So they're very useful for a lot of different purposes.
You're my hostage now, I get that. Okay, great, so that's good to know. So yeah, and again, it looks like you can have access to information into Frankie via her website, is that correct?
Yes, so if you have any questions about You Decide, just email info@smallplanet. All you have to remember is smallplanet.org.
Okay, and then I think on a sort of similar vein, we have a question saying, could someone give a link for the flyers to share with relatives to help? So same thing.
Okay, great. Oh, I'm so delighted that you're interested. Yeah.
Okay, so same thing. It looks like you can, if you have any questions, Frankie's happy to answer if you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Well, we'll go back. This is sort of a comment and a question. Julie Snorek. Thanks, Frankie. Wonderful and inspiring presentation. I love the hope you put forward in your work and appreciate so much the examples of Niger, a country where I lived and worked since 2005. I will just add that there are 2 efforts in Niger to reforest the land. And the Outer, I'm so sure I'm not pronouncing this correctly, Outer Duchy program, funded with millions of Italian dollars, that could be Italian, for Niger, was not as successful as the farmer-to-farmer agroforestry work in the South. Also, I'll say that the tree you mentioned is locally called GAO, and it drops its leaves during the rainy growing season and fixes nitrogen in the soil, a miracle tree. So it looks like that's more of a comment in sort of.
Oh yeah, no, I love to have that detail. Yeah, this tree is absolutely amazing, and you know, one of the things I love about this what's been created by farmers is it's really increased the status of women. They don't have to walk as far to get firewood, for one thing, because they can trim the tree without ruining its fertilizing potential, and so that gives them more time and less burden, and it just has so many different positives that have come out of that. So thank you for that. Thank you for reminding me of the name of that tree.
Perfect. We have another one from Lori Stratton. Says, I want Francis to know that Diet for a Small Planet was the most important influence in my life when I read it in the 1970s.
Oh, I just got chills.
Became a vegetarian at the age of 9.
Oh, wow.
That's a great fun fact. Becoming a vegan later, and I'm still a vegan over 50 years.
Oh, can I interrupt here? Anybody who's still listening, we are asking people to send us their tweaks to the recipes. My daughter's organizing this because everybody, I do, you know, I can't make my own recipes the same way twice. But if you have any suggestions on any recipe that you've tried and improved, please send it to info@smallplanet. And I just, for a little laugh here, my daughter found 74 references to margarine. And I want you to know they're all going out. They'll all be out.
There.
But so we've got that covered. But if you all have ideas for your own improvements of any of the recipes, that would be so fun. And we include your name. You get mentioned in the book.
Well,
that would be fun for me to be able to do that.
Awesome. All right, I'll just finish up this question. Both my sister and mother later ate plant-based diets due to your influence. Eating low on the food chain is necessary in these times. It may cut out pandemics also, since they're usually origination from livestock, marketplace, meat contamination, etc. So it seems a little bit more of a comment, but also, you know.
Yeah, I love that, bringing that in. Yeah, and you know what I say about being a plant-centered diet, I say now plant and planet-centered, you know, that I say, well, it may not change the world, but it changes me. I think everything we do like this, that where we align our choices with what we want for the world. Yes, it sends out ripples. Absolutely. I agree with that. But on this deeper level, you know, it really makes us more believable to ourselves, you know, more convincing. And that gives us, we want to do the next step and the next step. So I just can't underscore enough, you know, that making these changes in our own lives, that it changes our sense of possibility and opens up, oh, what's the next thing? And so I just love it that that people find that meaning, that same meaning that I found when I discovered that, oh, wow, the world of plants, wonderful.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead to this one. This is Orly Munzing. Can you explain what real democracy means to you? And hi, Orly, if you're still there, hopefully.
Can you say that again?
Can you explain what real democracy means to you?
Well,
Big one.
Democracy is a never-ending journey. I quote William Hastie, the first African-American appellate judge in the United States, and he said, democracy is not being, it is becoming. It is easily lost, but never finally won. And so it is this walk that we have attempted to do with all of the back steps that we've taken, but nonetheless, we, and now maybe with this horror of setback, and with so much money corrupting our system, we will begin to enter a new phase of democracy that is really accountable to the people. It is, I go through this again, that democracy means dispersion of power. That means accountable power, transparency, and mutual accountability. That I love to quote Rabbi Joshua Heschel, who said, some are guilty, but we're all responsible. And that's the spirit of democracy to me. It is a living process. It is a journey. And I just want to quote FDR in terms of warning. Franklin Roosevelt said in 1938, the liberty of democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to the point that it is stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. And I joke sometimes saying, yeah, I never use the F word unless I'm quoting an American president. But that's, he named it. That's where we're headed. And we can step up and say no and remove the power of money. And that means now John Sarbanes, my democracy hero, who I really got to appreciate more during my march, he has put forth HR 1, House Rep 1, and that is a bill that would address all of these questions of voting rights, of reforms like automatic voter registration, and mail-in ballot is needed, and felon re-enfranchisement, all of those kinds of reforms. HR 1, John Sarbanes, if we can get a new Congress, that could happen. So that's what democracy means to me. It's, we don't ever, ever, ever give up.
Great, that's a wonderful answer, I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna try to fit in a few more here. Being cognizant of time, and hopefully you're okay, Frankie, with time right now?
Okay. Sure, I'm loving it.
Perfect. I know that the next speaker, we have a little bit of wiggle room with this, so we can go a little bit over if that's okay. We have Cynthia Bottoms asking, why haven't we been able to solve food insecurity issue in so much as helping people start small gardens, have all foodnesses to donate leftovers, etc.?
Well, there's so many answers to that. I think our racist history is a big part of it. The way we have all of these signals and innuendos and framing of, you know, way back for decades and decades, but of course, long before that. But, you know, to think we've been told that poor people, it's their fault, they're not worthy. So there's been this obstacle that has kept us from doing what, you know, some other countries have done a much better job of avoiding food insecurity and hunger. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of the reason. And all the things that I've been saying about our corrupted democracy are absolutely a broken connection here, that it's answering to the wealthiest, and they benefit by keeping people fearful. If they don't take the lowest wage, they're going to be one of those hungry people on the street. So you know, I just want to underscore for you young people that I did not see a homeless person until the early 1980s under Ronald Reagan. And this does, you know, it, even with our form of capitalism, we didn't have the extent, and we had reduced hunger during the 1960s war on poverty. So there's nothing given about it, even within a, you know, a capitalist system. We can have a democracy that sets the rules, and so that people are paid fairly, that they have access to childcare. You know, I'm sure you've heard about the benefits, say, that Head Start had caused once that was introduced, and that was part of the whole war on poverty. So I just, there's not one answer to that, but it is certainly the racist beginning of our country has been played upon to divide us and to, you know, to point fingers and to blame. And so the more that we can now pull together in this moment of tragedy now with this, that we're facing this literally murder by a policeman, and recognize the degree of the racial bias within our policing system. I just tweeted out this morning that over the last 5 years, I believe it is, that the rate of African Americans who were shot by police was 2.5 times that of those who of white people. So all of this is you know, racism touches every piece of what we're asking then about how to end hunger. And I think the more we see how we've been played, how we've, you know, we've been just, white people, poor white people have been used, you know, by deflecting the crisis of the wealth going to the top by saying, oh, it's them, you know, that is causing your problem, you poor white people. So I think the more we can out that and help to explain that, and to help people realize what an outlier we are in the world in terms of our inequality, that we have an inequality that that is worse than about 100 countries. You know, we think we're worse than Europe, but actually, if you go to the World Bank and look at the inequality picture, it's so extreme. So we can help people understand there's nothing natural about this. We've created this nightmare, and it's based on these false view of our nature and how our system works. And certainly, we have to do everything we can to revive possibility that we can have democracy in America, because, you know, in my spiral of powerlessness, that was key, that if we don't trust ourselves, then we can't trust democracy, and we end up in the self-reinforcing system that ends up with Trump, and then we say, oh yeah, it's all broken, so give up with government. No. So I could go on and on probably forever, but I really think there is no way to sum it up in a neat little package, because it is deeply, deeply rooted in our culture. And the more we become aware, and, you know, I talked about the power of frame. And if we have the frame that, well, we may have problems, we're the best, that's not going to get us anywhere. Spread the word. No, there are many countries doing better than we are. And it doesn't mean that we're, you know, horrible. It doesn't mean we can't do better, but forget this idea. We can do much better. And we have examples of how now. Yeah. So I just, it's a moment of opportunity where maybe we can drop this notion that we're the best, and that therefore, you know, there's nothing better, even if it's bad. That doesn't get us anywhere.
Well put. I will say we are running up, like, it's 2:30 right now. So
okay.
I'd love to ask the rest of these questions. They're really, some really great ones. I guess I'll just encourage folks to go to Small Planet.
Please.
.org. And we put that up, I believe, in the chat box. Again, if people have questions or need to be reminded of that, you can email any of us, and
okay,
to share that as well.
And I just wanted to mention there's two things. One, if you want a PDF of this new book, it's not too late. You could make that, you know. Also, if you'd like to participate in offering your tweaks on any of my Diet for a Small Planet recipes, those are the two things that in particular, but I hope there's a lot of other things on our site that you'd like.
Well, very exciting. So we have a VIP peek at all these things.
Yeah.
That's really great for all the attendees. Yeah, I do want to thank you, Frankie. I think, yeah, again, you know, you can contact her, and it was such a pleasure having you speak. And even with all the tech stuff, honestly, just having you speak was so compelling. We didn't need the extra slides. So I really appreciate everyone being flexible.
Oh, and that's the other thing. If people wanted to see the slides, right, we could send them the slides. Perfect.
Yeah. So there you go. You can see what she was talking about.
Yeah, you should see the DDS women's pledging. You know?
I know. I really wanted to see that image. That sounded really pretty amazing. So yeah. So I think.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. You've really lifted my spirit so much, just telling my story, and it really, thank you so very, very much, all of you who listened, and all the great questions. Just fantastic. I felt like you were with me, and, you know, feel free to keep pushing me. You know, I want to be pushed.
Listen, so. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Frankie, for just an amazing, compelling talk and answering all the questions. I found myself just really concentrated on what you were saying so much. I was missing some of the questions and the hand raisings. I wasn't doing my job. Thank you, Jen, for staying on top of all that. And I just, you know, all of our sponsors too that made this possible, you know, Pete and Jerry's and Ben and Jerry's, and we have a ton of sponsors that have just helped us put this together so that we could offer this virtually.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
Thank all of them. Yeah.
I just remember. Where are you physically right now?
In Brattleboro.
Where?
I'm in the basement of the River Garden.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I lived up on Black Mountain, so you know where I lived. Yeah.
Right on Main Street.
So I really, really, really appreciate all that you do and just giving me this opportunity. It's really lifted my spirits.
It's really
Just to know that people are asking, you know, similar questions to what I'm asking. It's just so enriching for me right now. So.
And I will also just sort of remind you and folks who are still kind of on the call, we do have a happy hour tomorrow evening. So that's going to kick off at 5. So everyone's welcome to join for as long or as little as you'd like. So, you know, hopefully we'll have some more conversations with some of the keynotes and also with some of the participants. It'll be more just of like this sort of format. Everyone's face will be on as opposed to this webinar version where it's just the panelist or the speaker. So we'll be able to have some interesting conversations and hopefully continue talking about all these issues. Okay.
Okay.
These are always so weird to end. So, well, thank you so much, everybody. We'll say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll speak to you all soon.
Okay.